My father stared at me across the roast chicken, the good china between us like a battlefield. You can take the guest room, he said, his voice flat, almost bored. Or move out. Across the table, my half-sister Ruby didn't even try to hide her grin. She was still in her bomber jacket, a camera resting on the chair next to her like a second pet. Honestly, it's better if you're gone by tomorrow, she added, light and cheerful, as if she were suggesting a brunch spot. My fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. For a moment, all I heard was that sound and the rush of blood in my ears. The guest room, the damp little box in the basement that flooded every winter, the one we used for storage. My brain started calculating on autopilot, mortgage, taxes, repairs, utilities, because that's what I do. I'm a civil engineer. I design bridges and drainage systems in Portland, Oregon. I understand load-bearing structures. For the past 8 years, I hadn't just lived in this house. I'd carried it. My father's wife, Valerie, casually topped off his wine as if we were discussing paint colors. She wore white like she always did, the soft, expensive kind of fabric that never saw a washing machine. Her nails were perfect. Her smile small and satisfied. You're 33, Lena, she said, not looking at me. You don't need the biggest bedroom in the house when you're hardly here. Ruby needs space for her filming. The brand is taking off. This just makes sense. Ruby laughed, as if it were all so obvious. I mean, you've had your room forever. It's not fair if you're blocking Mom and me from growing. Mom, not my mom. Valerie had only been around for years, but somehow she'd claimed that word completely. I stared at my father. Dad, I said, my voice low, almost steady. My name is on the mortgage. I paid for the new roof. I paid for the retaining wall, the sump pump, the windows. Every winter, when this place tried to collapse on itself, I kept it standing. You're seriously telling me I can either live in a moldy storage room or move out? He didn't flinch. He just pushed a folder across the table with 2 fingers. I'm telling you, this house is not your responsibility anymore, he said. Valerie helped me refinance. Things are structured differently now. You've been complaining about how stressed you are. This is your chance to focus on your own life. So, guest room or move out. I opened the folder with numb fingers. The deed lay on top, crisp and official. The last time I'd seen these documents, my name had been side by side with his. It had been our house then, father and daughter, saving the only thing left after a brutal divorce and my grandmother's debts. Now, my name was gone. In its place, my father and Valerie as joint owners. I found a release of interest form. The signature in my name looked almost right. Almost. I never signed this, I said flat. Valerie shrugged delicately. You must have forgotten. There's so much paperwork in life, isn't there? My father's jaw tightened. Stop being dramatic, Lena. You've always said you didn't want to be tied down. You have good income, a good job. You'll land on your feet. We've made our decision. Across from me, Ruby scrolled her phone, then held it up, so I glimpsed a draft thumbnail. Moving back home to build my dream studio. The background was a photo of my bedroom. I stood up. The chair legs scraped the hardwood loudly in the silence. Then I'll make my decision too, I said. I'm moving out. At that table, I thought the betrayal was as bad as it could get. I thought I was walking away from a house and a family that never really saw me. I had no idea I was also walking away from an active crime scene. Years earlier, I'd moved back into that same house out of pure survival instinct. My father's, not mine. My parents' divorce had left him with a lopsided settlement and a tired old Portland craftsman that drank money like water. The foundations were cracked, the roof leaked, and my grandmother's medical debt had drained his accounts to fumes. I had just landed my first real engineering job. When the bank threatened foreclosure, he called me. I'll lose the house, Lena, he said, voice rough. This is where you grew up, where your room still is. I just need a little help until I get back on my feet. A little help turned into everything. We met with a loan officer together, refinanced the remaining mortgage, and put both our names on the deed. I did the math, looked at his salary, looked at mine, and silently decided how this was going to work. I moved back into my old room, traded my downtown studio for a 40-minute commute, and funneled half my paycheck into the house. When pipes burst, I used my bonus to pay the plumber. When the city flagged the retaining wall, I spent weekends drawing plans and nights working overtime to afford the concrete. I told myself it made sense. He was my dad. It was our home. Someday, when he retired, the house would be mostly paid off, and we'd both have a solid asset. It was almost responsible. Then Valerie arrived. She entered our lives like a lifestyle ad. White blazer, perfect hair, a warm, practiced laugh. They allegedly met at some financial wellness seminar. She called herself a wealth coach and retreat organizer, which sounded fake until I looked up her website and saw glossy photos of women in linen dresses doing yoga in vineyards. My father fell for her in record time. "She's brilliant," he said at dinner every night.
Hi.
"She understands how money works now. Compounding assets, leverage. You've got to stop thinking small, Lena. Owning one old house isn't the grand prize. Valerie is helping me see the bigger picture." Valerie would smile at me across the table and say things like, "You're so lucky you don't have kids or a husband. You can really push your potential. Use your cash flow to build something big." I was the one paying for his phone plan. He was lecturing me about cash flow. When Ruby started showing up on weekends, everything accelerated. She was 10 years younger, the daughter from my father's second round with a woman he divorced before I left for college. I'd never lived with her before. On screen, she was charming. Videos about thrifting my dream wardrobe, a day in the life of a 20-something creator. In person, she took up space in a way I never learned how to. She and Valerie were a match set. They shared clothes, makeup, secrets. They shared my father's attention. They did not share the bills. They called the house our content lab. Valerie filmed reels in the kitchen about nourishing meals for six-figure minds while I paid the skyrocketing grocery bill. Ruby used the driveway to shoot packing for my retreat content, tagging the investment club in every caption. Whenever I tried to talk about finances, Valerie would tilt her head. "You're stuck in scarcity, Lena," she'd say gently. "We're leveraging. There's a difference." My father stopped saying our house and started saying the property. It was subtle. It was everything. The night my job offered me a lead role on a bridge project across town, I sat at that same table, trying to share my win. I talked about new responsibilities, higher pay, how my name would go on drawings that would outlast all of us. My father nodded, distracted. Valerie smiled politely, then launched into a story about an investor who had just wired $50,000 into her latest retreat fund. Ruby looked me over and asked loudly in front of everyone, "Do you ever feel weird that you're almost mid-30s and still living with your dad?" They laughed. I laughed too because it was easier than explaining that if I moved out, the house would collapse financially. There were 1,000 little cuts like that. Comments about my love life, my clothes, my boring job, Valerie telling me guests thought I was such a good landlord when I handed over utility receipts, Ruby filming in my bedroom without asking because the light was better in there. "You're never home anyway." I told myself that if I held on a bit longer, once the mortgage reached a certain point, I could suggest a formal agreement. We'd put everything in writing. We'd be adults. Instead, they handled the paperwork without me. At that family dinner, when my father pushed those documents across the table, I realized the person I'd trusted most had quietly erased me from the one thing I thought we still shared. "I'm moving out," I said. I thought that was the end. But endings, I was about to learn, are rarely clean. And sometimes walking away is just the first step in a much colder plan. 2 days later, my coworker Nina found me sitting on the floor of a half-unpacked one-bedroom apartment across the river, surrounded by boxes and blistered fingers. She dropped a plastic grocery bag on the counter. Instant ramen, cheap wine, chocolate, a single lemon, as if she thought I might attempt something fancy. "This is the palace your dad threw you out of," she said, looking around. I laughed once. Sharp. "This is the palace I rent at market rate, with no emotional terrorism included. So yeah, upgrade." She sat next to me, shoulder to shoulder, and listened while I laid it all out. The guest room ultimatum, the forged-looking signature, Valerie and her investment club, Ruby and her dream studio. Nina wasn't polite about it the way I had been with myself. "Your dad is an idiot," she said flatly. I rolled my eyes, but somewhere between the second and third round, I pictured Valerie's condescending smile on the heavy bag, and the sound my glove made when it connected was satisfying. Outside the gym, my life slowly reorganized itself. I started sleeping through the night. I shopped for couch cushions based on what I liked, not what matched my father's furniture. I set up automatic transfers into a savings account I named Freedom. I almost convinced myself the house was behind me. Then my phone buzzed at work. A notification from the credit monitoring service I'd forgotten I signed up for. New inquiry. Home equity line of credit application denied. My stomach dropped. I hadn't applied for anything. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the address attached to the alert. It was the house. I stared at the screen, the fluorescent office lights humming above me, the unfinished bridge plans spread out on my desk. Numbers lined up in neat rows there. They obeyed physics and logic. They didn't lie. The alert didn't make sense unless one of two things was true. Either the bank had massively messed up, or someone had tried to open a line of credit against my former home using information that still partially matched mine. I forwarded the email to the only person I knew who read loan documentation for fun, my friend Evan, who had left engineering to work in banking. He called back within an hour. "Okay," he said without preamble. I could hear typing in the background. I pulled what I can from our system without getting fired. Good news. The application got flagged. They denied it pending verification. Bad news. They shouldn't have even gotten that far with your name attached. "I didn't sign anything," I said, flat, almost a refrain. "That's the thing," he said. "There's a release and a new deed recorded with the county from 6 months ago. You're off the title, Lena. It's your dad and a woman named Valerie. There's also a giant first mortgage and a pending second. Someone tried to use the property to secure more cash. The system still thinks you're tied to the original structure, so it pings your profile when things move." 6 months ago. 6 months ago, my father had hugged me at the grill and told me how grateful he was for everything I'd done. Valerie had smiled and handed me a plate of charred vegetables she called abundant skewers. "I need copies," I said. "Everything you can legally send me." "I'll do what I can," Evan said. "But Lena, if someone forged your signature on that release, we're not talking family drama. That's fraud." I thought of Valerie's words at the table. "You must have forgotten. There's so much paperwork in life, isn't there?" For the first time, I stopped assuming incompetence and started seeing intention. The records office in Multnomah County did not care about my feelings. The clerk slid printouts across the counter with a neutral face, as if she were handing me someone else's lab results. The dates and signatures stared back, black and clinical. The release of interest form, the new joint tenancy deed, the massive mortgage balance increased instead of decreased despite the years I'd funneled cash into it. My alleged signature looked like mine, but wrong. Letters too neat, curves too round. Valerie's was sweeping and precise. My father's was rushed, as if he'd been in a hurry. There were also documents I recognized from the refinancing years ago, but with subtle differences. Lines moved, names shifted, clauses added. One legal description stood out. Owner acknowledges that previous contributions from adult-child occupant constitute support and maintenance, not equity or ownership. Someone had made sure my money counted as generosity, not investment. On the walk back to my car, my hand shook so hard I dropped the folder once. Papers flew in the wind, scattering down the sidewalk. I scrambled after them, angry tears blurring my vision. My father hadn't just let Valerie talk him into bad financial decisions. They had rewritten history to erase what I'd done. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel. I could feel the familiar urge rising. The urge to confront, to explain, to give him a chance to fix it. But another voice, quieter and steadier, cut through. It sounded a little like Nina, a little like the kickboxing instructor, a little like the version of myself who had finally moved out. They will not fix what they do not see as broken. So, instead of driving to the house, I drove to Evan's office. He met me in a side room with glass walls and ugly carpet, flipping through the documents like a puzzle. "This isn't just sloppy," he said finally. "This is orchestrated. Whoever drafted these knew exactly how to minimize your legal claim and maximize their leverage with the bank." "Valerie runs an investment club," I said. "She calls herself a wealth coach. She's been hosting retreat planning sessions at the house. Investors wire her money based on vibes and brunch." He winced. "We're seeing more of this unregistered securities, pseudo-Ponzi stuff, especially when there's a charismatic front. If she convinced your dad to pledge the house as collateral for her business, and she's been using investor funds for personal expenses, that's ugly. You need a lawyer." I left his office with a referral to a securities attorney and a new, colder purpose. Up until then, my revenge had been passive. Leave, build a better life, let karma handle the rest. But karma is slow. And for someone like Valerie, karma needed a nudge. When I finally went back to the house, it was for information, not reconciliation. I timed my visit for a weekday afternoon, knowing most people would be at work. The driveway held 2 cars, their matching SUVs side by side. A ring light glowed faintly behind the front window. Valerie opened the door in a silky robe, expensive and infuriating. Her practiced warmth faltered for a second when she saw me, then snapped back into place. "Lena," she said. "What a surprise." I stepped inside without asking. The house looked different. My old bedroom door was open. Inside, my former bed had been replaced by clothing racks and shelves of handbags. A backdrop stood where my desk used to be. Fairy lights draped around it. Ruby's voice floated down the hallway mid-video, and that's how I manifested my dream studio in 6 months. I walked straight to the dining room and put the folder on the table. "I've been to the records office," I said. "I've read everything. I know exactly how you and my father restructured the mortgage. I know about the new loan, and I know you tried to open a line of credit last week." Her eyes narrowed just enough for me to see it. She picked up a page, scanned it, and set it down. "You're not on the title anymore, Lena. This isn't your house. Why are you here?" Ruby appeared in the doorway, eyeliner perfect, phone in hand. "What's going on?" she asked, wary. I looked at her for a long moment. For all her sharpness online, up close, she still had the baby face I remembered from that one awkward Christmas together. She had no idea she was standing in the middle of a financial time bomb. "You're filming in a house that might not be yours for much longer," I said. "Are you sure that's the brand you want?" She scoffed. "You're just jealous again." "What?" "You thought you'd live here forever because you paid a few bills." "A few?" I repeated quietly. My father came in then, drawn by the tension. He took in the documents on the table, my posture, Valerie's cool expression. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I thought we agreed." "You agreed," I said. "Without me, without my consent. I'm here to tell you both something very simple." They waited, arms crossed, 3 of them aligned in a row. For a second, it felt like the night of the guest room ultimatum all over again. They were the majority. I was the overreacting outsider. Only this time, I wasn't asking for validation. I was delivering a warning. "In a few weeks," I said, "you're going to get a call. It might be from a regulator, or the bank, or a very angry investor. When that happens, do not use my name. Do not suggest I was part of any decision you made with this house, or with Valerie's fund. I have copies of everything, and I've talked to people who know exactly what you've been doing." Valerie laughed softly. "You have no idea how these things work, sweetheart." "Maybe not yet," I said. "But I'm learning fast." I left before they could kick me out. I didn't go back again. Not physically. I didn't need to. There were other ways to walk through someone's home, and other ways to set it on fire without lighting a match. The attorney Evan referred me to looked like he'd been born in a suit. He listened without interrupting, fingers steepled, eyes sharp. "We're looking at fraud in multiple layers," he said eventually. "If your signature was forged, that's one crime. If your father knowingly signed documents misrepresenting your contributions, that's another. But the big fish is the investment club." He tapped the printouts I had collected from Valerie's website and investor emails, hands trembling with anger. She's promising fixed returns, referencing guaranteed payouts, and using the house as a physical anchor for legitimacy without disclosing the debt structure. If funds are being diverted to personal use instead of actual projects, that's securities fraud. There are agencies that care about that kind of thing. We drafted a complaint. Official, precise, full of dates and dollar signs. I attached every screenshot I could find, Ruby's casual videos about investors, Valerie's captions about secured assets, the glimpses of the house used as shorthand for stability. With Evan's help, we sent the packet to the State Division of Financial Regulation. It vanished into whatever bureaucratic machine handles tips like that. For a while, nothing happened. I went to work, adjusted beam calculations, advanced my bridge project, hit heavy bags until my knuckles ached. But revenge doesn't have to be loud to be effective. Sometimes it's just a matter of pulling the right thread and waiting for the fabric to unravel. The fabric started to rip at Valerie's next investor event. I only knew about it because Ruby, bless her shallow instincts, posted a teaser on her channel. A sweeping shot of the dining room transformed into a visionary brunch. Investors in linen, Valerie at the head of the table with a microphone. The caption read, "You all believed in our retreat dream when it was just an idea. Today we're revealing Phase 2. Phase 2 sounded like more people handing her money she couldn't possibly pay back. I watched the clip twice, jaw clenched, then turned to the draft email sitting in my outbox, addressed to a long list Evan had helped me assemble. It contained a link to a shared folder. Every document I had, mortgage papers, public records, screenshots, and a short factual summary. I had written and rewritten the email for weeks, hesitating because once I hit send, there was no going back. No pretending I hadn't set the fire myself. As Ruby's video replayed, I stopped hesitating. I added one line at the top. If you're at today's brunch, you deserve to see the full picture before you write another check. Then I hit send. Later, I would hear a dozen versions of what happened in that dining room. People remember disasters in fragments, colored by their own panic. But a few facts were consistent. Valerie had just finished a speech about expanding to international retreats when phones began buzzing around the table. One notification, then another, then a ripple. People looked down, clicked the link. In the video someone secretly recorded, you can see the realization spread. First in one man's face at the far end, expression shifting from bored to confused to furious in 30 seconds. Then it jumped like contagion to the woman next to him, then the couple across the table. Voices rose. Is this a joke? Is that your house? Why is there a foreclosure notice draft in here? Valerie tried to smile, told them not to worry, not to fall for fear-based narratives. She blamed an ex-family member with unresolved trauma, claiming that explained forged signatures and maxed-out credit. Ruby, standing in the doorway with her camera, lowered it slowly. A gray-haired man in a blazer slammed his hand on the table. You told us the property was free and clear. You signed a statement there was no conflicting lien. Valerie held up her palms. Paperwork can look scary out of context. You have to trust. Is this why my last payout was late? A woman cut in. Because you're servicing debt instead of building anything. In the recording, you can clearly hear Ruby whisper, "Mom," fear threading her voice for the first time in the entire mess. Then her phone buzzed. She read faster than the rest, face draining of color. She looked up at Valerie with eyes that suddenly made her look 14 again. She's lying, Ruby said, voice cracking. Mom, tell me she's lying. Valerie opened her mouth, and for the first time, nothing smooth came out. Her lips moved. No sound. That shaky video went viral in quiet, small corners of the internet, investor forums, local gossip groups, one particularly messy subreddit. It was enough. Within a week, regulators called. They already had my complaint from months earlier. Now they had momentum, angry investors, a public narrative. They paid Valerie a visit that did not end with a business card and a smoothie. The house that had once been the solid anchor of her empire became Exhibit A in a list of alleged misrepresentations. The giant mortgage, the attempted second lien, property taxes months late despite all her talk of abundance. I wasn't there when the investigators first knocked. I didn't see my father's face when they asked for records. I didn't hear the neighbors whisper as cruisers sat in the driveway. I only heard the aftermath.